Dead, I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake City, Joe says I am standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge. But Joe, said Joe, but I ain't dead. Said Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man. Said Joe, I didn't die. Said Joe, I didn't die. And standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, said Joe, what they can never kill went on to organize. Went on to organize. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where workers fight and organize, it's there you'll find Joe Hill. It's there you'll find Joe Hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. Thank you. It is good to be here this evening, and I have some good news. I just received my passport. It was a long time coming. For those who may not know, my right to travel, my passport was taken away from me in 1950. But this being 1958, to the Supreme Court's credit, they decided that we cannot take away a person's right to travel because of their political beliefs or associations. Now, there's been a great deal of controversy in regards to what are these beliefs as it relates to me, and who are these associations. And usually, when someone were to ask me the question, well, Mr. Robeson, are you a communist? I would answer back, it's none of your business. The Communist Party in this country is a legal party, much like the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. But in defending the rights, the constitutional rights of American citizens, including myself, it's no one's business what my political affiliations are, unless I care to make that known. Now, that would be my usual answer, but being that I'm among friends, I hope, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth. In 1946, I would call before the Tenney Committee. Now, the Tenney Committee is a joint Senate and House committee in California, allegedly to root out communism. And I would call before this committee and I was asked the question whether or not I was a communist, which I answered under oath that I was not. Although, it is a known fact that since the 1930s, I am a socialist. For me, socialism represents humankind at a higher stage of existence. It has nothing to do with plots or conspiracies. It has to do with what the human need, from tribalism to capitalism to socialism, represents humankind at a higher stage of existence. It had nothing to do with plots or conspiracies. I've never been a part of any plot or conspiracy, and I don't know anyone who has. This was known by 1946, certainly, because I made it known. Also, certainly by 1946, it was known that I am an anti-fascist. When I visited the Soviet Union for the first time in 1934, I made a stop in Berlin. And this is when Hitler was rising to power. And it was a very disturbing incident I'll talk about later. But I was very disturbed as I got back on the train. And I knew that fascism had to be fought wherever it was. I was involved in the Spanish Civil War in terms of supporting the Republican forces against Franco and backed by the might of Mussolini and Hitler. And I said in 1937 at Royal Albert Hall that the artist must choose sides. He must elect to fight for either freedom or slavery. I'd made my choice. I had no alternative. And in 1938, I went to Spain and I sang and supported the troops. And when I left London in 1939 and came back to the United States, I was involved in supporting our efforts, fighting against the Axis, fighting for war bonds and victory bonds, singing and constantly supporting our troops. So it was well known that I am an anti-fascist, to fight fascism either in Europe or here in the guise of the Ku Klux Klan and the White Citizens Council. Also, it was well known that I, certainly by 1946, that I am an anti-colonialist. Again, while in London, I met many African dock workers and students from all over the African continent. Some of these gentlemen are well known now because of their fight against colonialism. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana; Nnamdi Azikiwe, Nigeria; Jomo Kenyatta, Kenya. These men were friends of mine, or became friends of mine. My wife and I became members of the West African Students' Union. And in 1937, I co-founded the Council on African Affairs, which is the only lobbying group in this country to deal specifically with the liberation of Africa from colonialism. So these things were well known, certainly by 1946. Now, 10 years later, 1956, I was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Strange sounding name. The House Un-American Activities Committee. Seems to me the people running the House Un-American Activities Committee were the real Un-Americans. In any case, I would call before this tribunal, and I would ask the question again, whether or not I was a communist, which I refused to answer. Now, my refusal is no mystery. I answered the question sufficiently in 1946. Since I came back in 1939, various intelligence agencies, some of which may be here, have been following me. So they know that I'm not communist. And if I said I was not a communist and they knew I was, that's called perjury. And they would do their best to put me under the jail. But no such thing exists, and they know it. Now, during the question and answer session, things got a little bit heated. And someone had asked me, Mr. Robeson, since you love Russia, why didn't you stay there? And I answered back rather pointedly, because my father was a slave here. My people died building this country, and I'm going to stay here and have a part of it just like you, and no fascist-minded people will drive me from it. Is that clear? Needless to say, they didn't like me very much at the House Un-American Activities Committee. And that's fine, because I don't like them very much either. Many people have asked the question, who, what, why is Paul Robeson, why have I taken these stands and put my livelihood, my career, even my life at risk? And the only way to really know this is to examine a person's past, their beginnings, to see what their influences were, who impacted them. So, begging your patience, I'm going to talk a little bit about my beginnings, not to foster any kind of agreement, but hopefully to foster understanding as to why I am the way I am. Now, there is a song. There's an old man called the Mississippi. That's the old man I don't like to be. Now, that song is Old Man River. It was written by Oscar Hammerstein II and Jerome Kern. It was written for a musical called Showboat that I performed in 1928 in the London production, which was very successful. Came back here and did a New York production, and then ultimately I did the film in 1935, which was released in 1936. Now, when I first sang the lyrics, they were not the lyrics that I sing today. They went something like this: beg your pardon,